You ever witness something so small yet so powerful it sticks with you for years? Like, a random Tuesday where nothing special should have happened, but it ends up altering the course of someone's life? That's exactly what went down that day. It all started with a snap, literally. "You ready yet, old man?" The words shot across the bustling restaurant, sharp and unnecessary, slicing through the cozy hum of silverware clinking and soft conversations. Heads turned, conversations paused mid-sentence. The target? An elderly man sitting alone in the corner, nervously flipping through the menu like it was written in a foreign language. He had those kind, watery eyes you'd expect on someone's grandfather, the kind that held too many memories and not enough people to share them with. The voice? That belonged to Ethan, a cocky waiter with the charm of a scratched-up spoon. Ethan wasn't a bad guy, not inherently evil or anything. He was just, burned out, bitter, and too self-absorbed to notice when he crossed the line. Which he did, a lot. The old man looked up, startled. He wasn't being slow to be difficult. His hands trembled slightly, probably arthritis. His eyes squinted, not because he was clueless, but because reading tiny fonts gets harder when you've lived long enough to remember rotary phones. Before the man could stammer out a response, Ethan rolled his eyes dramatically. "Maybe you should just leave if you can't decide. We've got real customers waiting." Yeah. That's when the snap happened, not from the old man, though. Nope. From Keanu Reeves. Now, imagine sitting at a table, minding your own business, maybe enjoying a quiet lunch. Then, out of nowhere, Keanu freaking Reeves stands up. Not with a dramatic Hollywood flair, but with this calm, quiet intensity that somehow made everyone freeze. His chair barely scraped the floor as he rose, yet it felt like a thunderclap. I was there, sitting 2 tables over, chewing on a sad salad I regretted ordering. And suddenly, I wasn't chewing anymore. Keanu didn't yell. He didn't puff out his chest or throw a punch like some vigilante. He just walked. Each step deliberate, his eyes locked on Ethan, who was too busy scoffing at the old man to realize his life was about to change. The whole restaurant felt like it was holding its breath. When Keanu reached the table, he didn't even look at Ethan first. Instead, he gently placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. His voice was soft but carried enough weight to make even the air feel heavier. "Sir, I'm sorry you were treated like that. You deserve better." Ethan, realizing too late that he'd attracted unwanted attention, tried to laugh it off. "Hey, man, I was just joking. The guy's taking forever, you know." He shrugged, like that explained everything. Keanu finally turned to him. His expression? Not angry. Not even disappointed. Just calm. Which, somehow, was way more terrifying. "You don't know him, do you?" Keanu asked quietly. Ethan blinked. No? Then maybe don't assume he's here to waste your time. Do you know how much courage it might have taken him just to come out today? To sit here, alone, hoping for a decent meal and a little kindness? The room stayed dead silent. Even the kitchen staff peeked out. Ethan opened his mouth, maybe to defend himself, but nothing came out. His smug grin evaporated. For the first time, I think he realized the weight of his words. Not just the sound, but the impact. But Keanu wasn't finished. Respect isn't about who's fast, who's slow, who's old, or young. It's about recognizing the humanity sitting in front of you. He didn't shout. Didn't need to. His voice had the kind of quiet force that made you feel like the ground might crack beneath you. Ethan's face went from pale to red, cycling through every shade of embarrassment. And the old man? He looked up at Keanu, his eyes glistening, not with tears exactly, but something close. Gratitude mixed with disbelief that someone had stood up for him when he'd clearly stopped expecting anyone to. Keanu gave the old man a small nod, then turned back to Ethan. "It's not too late to be better," he said softly. And then, just like that, he walked back to his seat. No mic drop. No dramatic exit. Just sat down like he'd commented on the weather. But the storm he left behind? Oh, it was brewing hard. Ethan stood there, frozen, his apron suddenly feeling like armor he didn't deserve. The tables around him weren't filled with strangers anymore. They were witnesses. Mirrors reflecting exactly who he'd been in that moment. He didn't apologize, not yet. He just walked away, probably to the back, probably to figure out how to swallow the giant lump of shame lodged in his throat. But that was only the beginning. Because what happened next? Well, let's just say that day wasn't done teaching lessons. You'd think after being publicly humbled by Keanu Reeves, Ethan would have had some kind of cinematic redemption arc right then and there. Like, he'd rush back, apologize to the old man, maybe even offer him a free dessert, and everyone would slow clap. Roll credits. Yeah, no. Real life doesn't wrap things up with neat little bows. Ethan disappeared into the back, leaving the old man staring down at his menu like it was suddenly a shield. The restaurant slowly exhaled, the tension diffusing, but not disappearing. Conversations picked back up, but they were quieter, more cautious. Like people were afraid their words might be overheard and judged too. Keanu went back to his seat, casually picking up his coffee like nothing happened, flipping through his phone. No big deal. Just dismantled someone's ego with the gentleness of a Zen monk. But you could feel it, like the air itself was different. Me? I couldn't stop watching the old man. He wasn't eating. Heck, he wasn't even pretending to look at the menu anymore. His hands sat flat on the table, fingers slightly curled, as if gripping onto something invisible. And that's when I did something I wouldn't normally do. I stood up. I had no plan. No speech prepared. I just walked over and said, "Hey, mind if I sit?" The old man looked up, surprised. His eyes were these pale blue, faded like denim washed too many times. He gave a small nod, and I slid into the booth across from him. "That was something, huh?" I chuckled nervously, trying to break the ice. He gave a soft smile, more polite than amused. "It was kind," he said quietly. His voice was raspy, like it hadn't been used much lately. We sat in silence for a beat before he added, "People don't usually notice." I didn't know what to say to that. Because he was right. We don't notice. We don't see the elderly man sitting alone, struggling to read a menu, his hands shaky, not because we're cruel, but because we're busy, wrapped up in our own little worlds. "I'm Jake," I offered, just to fill the space. "Arthur," he replied softly. Ethan eventually emerged from the back, his face flushed like he'd either cried or screamed into a bag of flour, could have been both. He avoided eye contact with everyone, especially Keanu, and went straight to wiping down a spotless table like it owed him money. But here's the thing about guilt, it doesn't just fade because you ignore it. As I chatted with Arthur, Ethan kept glancing over. He wasn't glaring. He wasn't rolling his eyes like usual. He was just watching. Like he couldn't unsee what Keanu had shown him, that the person he dismissed as a nuisance was, in fact, a person. Arthur told me little bits about his life between sips of water. Widower. Retired teacher. Used to love traveling with his wife before she passed. Now he mostly stayed home because the world felt louder, faster, harder to keep up with. Coming to this restaurant was his adventure for the week. That hit me harder than I expected. An adventure. Just sitting alone in a booth, trying to order lunch. I excused myself after a while, letting Arthur enjoy his meal once his order finally arrived, delivered silently by Ethan, whose face was a masterclass in awkward humility. But the real twist? That came after the shift ended. The restaurant was closing. Chairs flipped onto tables, lights dimming. I stayed late, pretending to finish my coffee just to see if Ethan would say anything. And sure enough, as he clocked out, he didn't head straight for the door. He hesitated, hovered, then made a beeline, not for me, not even for Keanu, who had long since left. He went straight back to Arthur. "Hey," Ethan mumbled, standing awkwardly at the edge of the booth like a kid about to confess to breaking a window. Arthur looked up, a forkful of pie halfway to his mouth. I was a jerk earlier," Ethan blurted out. "I'm sorry. I was rude, and you didn't deserve that." Arthur blinked slowly, then set his fork down. "You're right," he said simply. "Not cruel. Not forgiving, either. Just stating a fact." Ethan seemed thrown by that, like he expected Arthur to wave it off, make it easier for him. But Arthur didn't. He just waited. "I don't know why I said what I did," Ethan added, shifting his weight like his shoes suddenly didn't fit. "Guess I thought being quick with words made me smart or something. But it just made me an asshole." Arthur finally gave a small nod, his eyes softening. "It takes more strength to admit you're wrong than to pretend you're always right." Ethan stood there for a second, letting that sink in, then gave a stiff nod before shuffling out the door. "I thought that was the end of it. Lesson learned. Roll credits, again. But the real story? It wasn't over. Not even close. Because the next day, Ethan showed up for his shift, different. And that's when things really started to change. You ever hear people say, a person can't change overnight? Well, they're right. Ethan didn't wake up the next day a saint. He didn't grow a halo or start handing out free hugs with the specials. But something was different. Subtle, like the faint scent of rain after a storm, you might not see it, but you feel it. The morning after the incident, I was back at the same cafe, partly out of habit, partly because I was curious. Okay, mostly because I was nosy. I wanted to see if Ethan would pretend none of it happened. But when he walked in, something was off. No cocky swagger, no sarcastic comments. Just quiet. His posture wasn't slouched with arrogance anymore. It was straighter, like he was carrying something heavy on his shoulders, and maybe he was. I watched as he tied his apron, glanced around the restaurant, and, this is the kicker, he smiled at the first customer who walked through the door. Not that forced, I'm only doing this because my manager's watching, smile. A real one. It was an elderly woman, probably in her 70s, with a cane and one of those floral handbags that screamed, "I've had this since the 90s and it's still good, thank you very much." She walked slowly, her steps deliberate, scanning for an open seat. Ethan, yes, Ethan, walked over, not with impatience, but with genuine warmth. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Can I help you find a seat?" She blinked, surprised. Maybe she'd been expecting the usual indifference you get when you're no longer young and quick. But she nodded, and Ethan gently guided her to a booth, even pulling out the chair for her. I swear I almost dropped my coffee. But here's where it gets interesting. Change isn't a straight line. It's messy. Uneven. Like Ethan's journey. Later that same shift, a customer came in, mid-30s, Bluetooth headset in one ear, barking into his phone like the world owed him something. The kind of guy who snaps his fingers at waiters and treats everyone like they're part of the furniture. Ethan approached his table. "What do you want to drink, sir?" His tone was polite but tight, like a rubber band stretched too far. The guy didn't even look up. Just waved him off mid-conversation, muttering, "Water. Cold. And hurry up." I saw it happen, the flicker of old Ethan rising to the surface. That flash of annoyance, the tightening of his jaw. His grip on the notepad clenched just a little too hard. I held my breath. Was he going to snap? Fire back with some snarky comment? But no. He exhaled, shoulders relaxing slightly, and simply said, "Of course, sir. I'll be right back." That was the moment I realized, it wasn't about flipping a switch. It was about fighting the urge to flip it back. After his shift, I caught him outside, sitting on the curb with a cigarette he wasn't even smoking, just holding it, staring at the ground like it held answers. "Rough day?" I asked, plopping down beside him. He glanced at me, recognizing me from the other day. "You could say that." I nodded toward the cafe. "I saw you with the guy in the suit. You handled it well." He snorted softly. "Barely. Took everything in me not to say something." He fiddled with the cigarette, rolling it between his fingers. "You know what's messed up? It's easier to be an asshole. It's like muscle memory." I didn't argue. He wasn't wrong. So why not just go back to it? I asked, genuinely curious. Ethan went quiet for a moment, then said, "Because of him." I didn't have to ask who him was. Keanu Reeves had done more with a few words than most people could with an entire TED Talk. Ethan continued, "I keep thinking about what he said. About how you don't know what someone went through just to show up. That old guy. Arthur? I didn't see him. Not really. Just another slow customer holding me up. But now, it's like I can't unsee it. Everyone's carrying something. That stuck with me. Not just because Ethan said it, but because it was true." Over the next few weeks, I watched Ethan transform, not perfectly, but noticeably. He started remembering regulars' names. Asked how their day was going. Helped a dad wrangle his toddler instead of rolling his eyes. But the biggest shift? That came when Arthur walked back in. It was a rainy Thursday. The cafe wasn't too busy, just the usual hum of conversations mixed with the soft patter of raindrops against the windows. Arthur shuffled in, wearing the same beige jacket, a little more worn at the cuffs. Ethan spotted him immediately. He didn't hesitate. Walked right over, no awkwardness this time. "Arthur," he greeted, like they were old friends. "Good to see you again. Your usual table?" Arthur smiled, a genuine, warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "That'd be nice, thank you." Ethan not only seated him but took the time to chat. Asked about his day, listened without glancing at his watch or checking the time. It wasn't forced. It was real. And when Arthur left, he patted Ethan's shoulder and said, "You've grown, son. I can tell." Ethan didn't reply. He just nodded, but the look on his face said it all. That night, as I was leaving, I passed Ethan again. He wasn't outside with a cigarette this time. Just leaning against the doorframe, watching the rain. "You okay?" I asked. He shrugged, but there was a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I think, yeah. I'm okay." And for the first time, I believed him. You know how they say one small act of kindness can ripple out, affecting people you'd never expect? I used to think that was just some feel-good nonsense people put on greeting cards. But after watching what happened with Ethan, I realized it's real. Change doesn't just stop with the person it starts with, it spreads, like dominoes tipping over, one after the other. And the next domino? It wasn't Ethan. It was everyone around him. About a month had passed since the Keanu incident, and by now, Ethan wasn't just different, he was consistent. No more good days mixed with bad attitudes. He'd genuinely shifted. The regulars noticed. His coworkers noticed. Heck, even the grumpy manager, Rachel, who was basically allergic to emotions, started acting less like a robot. But life has a way of testing you when you think you've got it all figured out. It was a Saturday, brunch hour, the cafe packed to the brim with the usual crowd. Young couples pretending not to check their phones, parents bribing kids with pancakes, and the occasional lone wolf tucked into a corner with a laptop, drowning in caffeine. Ethan was in his element, moving between tables, balancing plates like some kind of service ninja. That's when she walked in. Not Arthur. Not Keanu. No, this was someone from Ethan's past, a blast from the old Ethan days. Her name was Leah. Tall, sharp features, the kind of woman who wore confidence like a tailored suit. She'd been a server at the cafe before quitting, largely because of Ethan's crappy attitude back in the day. They'd clashed constantly, Ethan's sarcasm meeting her zero-tolerance policy for BS. She hadn't been around since he started to change. And the second she saw him, her eyebrow shot up like a skeptical arrow. Well, she smirked, sliding onto a bar stool. Didn't expect to see you still here. I figured you'd have scared off the last customer by now. Old Ethan would have fired back instantly, probably with some snarky comment about her haircut or whatever. But new Ethan? He just smiled, a genuine one, not the tight, forced grin he used to wear like armor. Hey, Leah. Good to see you. What can I get you? No bite. No defensiveness. Just respect. Leah blinked, clearly thrown off. She recovered quickly, though. Huh. New script? Didn't peg you for the customer service charm school type. Ethan didn't flinch. Nah. Just trying to be better. She narrowed her eyes, like she was trying to peel him open, figure out what was hiding under the surface. Better, huh? What happened? You hit your head? Ethan chuckled softly, shaking his head. Something like that. Now, here's where it got interesting. Because Leah didn't just roll her eyes and move on. No. She stayed. Ordered coffee, then lunch. And while Ethan worked the floor, she watched. Not in a creepy way, more like she was observing, waiting for the mask to slip. But it didn't. She saw him refill an elderly man's water without being asked. Offer a coloring sheet to a restless kid. Even crouch down to help a customer pick up a fork they'd dropped, not with an exaggerated sigh, but with a smile and a simple, no problem. Eventually, she couldn't help herself. As Ethan passed her table, she blurted out, "Okay, seriously. Who are you, and what did you do with the real Ethan?" Ethan paused, wiping his hands on his apron. There was a brief flicker of something in his eyes, not annoyance, but reflection. "I met someone who made me realize I was being an ass," he said simply. "And that I didn't have to keep being one." Leah leaned back, clearly expecting more. When Ethan didn't elaborate, she huffed. "That's it? Some life-changing guru showed up and, poof, you're a decent human now." Ethan's smile faded, replaced by something softer. It wasn't a guru. Just a guy who cared enough to say something when I needed to hear it. That shut her up. For the first time, Leah didn't have a snarky comeback. She just stirred her coffee, staring at the swirl of cream like it held answers. But the story doesn't end there. Later that week, Leah came back. Not once, but twice. Each time, she stayed longer, talked more. Not just with Ethan, but with the other servers. She'd always been guarded, like her sarcasm was a shield. But now? The edges were softer. She even laughed, actually laughed, at one of Ethan's dumb jokes about spilled coffee. It was like watching two parallel lines finally intersect after years of running side by side. And then came the real test. A customer walked in one evening, late, just before closing. He was the kind of guy who seemed to suck the warmth out of the room the second he entered. Loud. Demanding. Rude for the sake of being rude. The type who thought snapping his fingers was an acceptable way to get service. Rachel, the manager, looked ready to snap. The other servers avoided the table like it was radioactive. But Ethan? He walked right over. "Good evening. What can I get for you?" The guy sneered. "Took you long enough. You people don't know how to run a restaurant, huh?" Everyone tensed. I swear you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing. Leah stood at the counter, watching, her jaw tight. But Ethan didn't flinch. "Sorry for the wait, sir. What can I get started for you?" No sarcasm. No biting remarks. Just calm, steady professionalism. The guy kept pushing, complaining about the menu, the lighting, even the temperature of the ice water. But Ethan handled it all with the kind of grace that made you wonder if he'd been replaced by a body double. After the guy finally left, leaving a pathetic tip and a bad attitude behind, Leah walked over. She didn't say anything at first, just handed Ethan a clean rag like it was some kind of peace offering. Then, quietly, she said, "I don't know how you did that." Ethan shrugged. "It's not about him. It's about who I want to be." That line stuck with me. It's not about them. It's about who you want to be. And you know what? It hit Leah, too. She didn't say much after that, but she kept coming back. Less guarded. More present. Eventually, she even reapplied for a job at the cafe. Said she missed the people, not just the regulars, but the new energy. Ethan's change had become contagious. But it wasn't just the staff. The customers noticed too. Regulars started tipping more. Conversations lasted longer. The cafe felt different, not because of new paint or fancy promotions, but because one person decided to be better. And it inspired everyone else to try, too. Funny how that works. Life's funny, you know. Sometimes it takes a single moment, a flicker of time, barely a blip on the universe's radar, to shift the course of everything. For Ethan, it was the day Keanu Reeves stood up. But what none of us realized back then was that the story wasn't just about Ethan. It was about all of us. Weeks turned into months. The cafe settled into this new rhythm, warmer, friendlier, like the air itself had learned how to smile. Ethan wasn't just a decent waiter anymore. He'd become the heart of the place. The guy who remembered your name, your usual order, and that weird story you'd rambled about during a stressful Monday 2 weeks ago. Leah was working there again. Rachel, the manager, even cracked jokes sometimes. Regulars came not just for the food but for the atmosphere, a vibe stitched together by small, invisible threads of kindness. And then it happened. Keanu came back. It was a quiet afternoon, midweek, the cafe half empty. I was there, as usual, nursing a coffee I didn't really need, scrolling through my phone. The bell above the door jingled, and in walked him, Keanu Reeves. No entourage. No fanfare. Just Keanu, in a worn jacket, sunglasses perched on his head, looking like he'd just strolled in from saving someone's cat from a tree. Ethan froze mid-step, holding a tray of empty glasses. For a split second, I saw the old nerves flash across his face. But then, just as quickly, they were gone, replaced by that calm, grounded look he'd worked hard to earn. He set the tray down, wiped his hands on his apron, and walked over. No hesitation. No dramatic music playing in the background, just quiet footsteps on the tiled floor. "Hey," Ethan greeted, his voice steady. "Welcome back." Keanu smiled, that soft, effortless grin he's famous for. "Good to see you." Ethan gestured toward a table by the window. "Your usual spot?" "Sure," Keanu chuckled. "Though I don't think I had a usual." Ethan led him to the table, took his order, a black coffee, simple and unpretentious, much like the man himself, and then, for a brief moment, hovered. You could tell he had something to say, but he wasn't sure how to start. Finally, he cleared his throat. I don't know if you remember me, Ethan began. Keanu looked up, his eyes sharp but kind. I remember. Ethan let out a breath he probably didn't realize he was holding. I've been meaning to thank you, he said quietly. What you said that day, it stuck with me. Changed me, actually. Keanu didn't say anything right away. He just listened, really listened, like Ethan's words mattered, which, of course, they did. I was a jerk back then, Ethan admitted, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Thought being quick with words made me clever. But it just made me an ass. You called me out without being cruel. You showed me it was okay to change. Keanu's smile deepened, and he gave a small nod. It's never too late to be better. That line hit different hearing it in person, like the words carried more weight because of who they came from, not just Keanu the actor, but Keanu the person. Ethan laughed softly, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, well. I've been trying. Still learning, but I'm not the same guy I was. Keanu leaned back, his coffee untouched. That's the thing about change, he said. It's not about flipping a switch. It's about showing up differently every day. Sounds like you've been doing that. Ethan nodded, his eyes glinting with something close to pride. But here's the twist. Arthur walked in. Yeah, Arthur. The old man from that very first day. Same beige jacket, same careful steps, but something was different. His posture was straighter, his eyes brighter. Maybe because, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't invisible. Ethan's face lit up. He practically sprinted over, greeting Arthur with a handshake that turned into one of those quick, awkward half-hugs people do when they're not sure if it's appropriate but it feels right. Arthur, Ethan beamed. You're just in time. Arthur looked puzzled until Ethan gently guided him over to Keanu's table. I wanted to introduce you, Ethan said, his voice soft but steady. Arthur, this is the man who started it all. Arthur squinted slightly, then recognition dawned. His eyes softened, a small smile tugging at his lips. Ah, he said quietly. The one who stood up when it mattered. Keanu chuckled, shaking Arthur's hand. I think you're the one who mattered. And there they were, three men connected by nothing more than a moment in time, a ripple effect that turned into a wave. They sat for a while, just talking. Not about fame or movies or life-changing speeches. Just, life. Simple, ordinary things. Coffee, books, memories. As I watched from my usual spot, it hit me, this wasn't just a story about a rude waiter who learned respect. It was about all of us. How every interaction, no matter how small, can shift the course of someone's day, or their entire life. Eventually, Keanu stood to leave. No dramatic exit. Just a quiet, heartfelt goodbye. Before he walked out the door, he turned back, his hand on the frame. Take care, Ethan. And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about being better than you were yesterday. Ethan smiled, his eyes shining just a little. I'll remember. And he did. We all did.